And I guess this could go for a lot of people, but it always seemed like nothing was wrong. I didn't feel like I could believe it until I heard it, that it was actually them. Because it's just so hard to believe.
Just devastating. I've known the Mitchells a couple years, and just to think that this type of violence is taking place right now in our society, and just great people and great restaurants.
A babysitter picked up the phone. So did a sister at the exact same time. Neither of them knew the other was calling. Neither of them had heard from the Mitchell family since the night before. And when Houston police arrived at 2113 Kingston Street in River Oaks at 5:26 on a Monday evening, they walked through that front door and found something that would silence an entire city. 4 people, all shot in the head. A woman, 2 children, and a man. Nobody called it an accident. Nobody called it a mystery. Police looked at the scene, looked at the evidence, and within hours they had a name: Matthew Mitchell. Husband, father, suspect. But here's what's been bothering me since I started pulling this case apart. The questions that nobody in the mainstream coverage seems to be asking. The details that don't quite sit still when you look at them closely. Because when you study behavior for a living, when you spend your time understanding what drives people to the absolute edge, a scene that looks clean on the surface sometimes opens up into something far more complicated underneath. Stay with me, because this one goes deep. Before we get into it, I need to ask you something directly. Stories like the Mitchells don't get told the way they deserve without a community that shows up. If you believe that real people behind these headlines deserve more than a 2-minute news segment, hit that subscribe button right now. Hit the bell. Leave a like. It sounds small, but it's how we keep going deeper on cases that matter. Thy Mitchell deserves more than a headline. Her children deserve more than a statistic. Let's give them that. Now, let me tell you who Thy Mitchell actually was. She was not a background character in someone else's story, not a supporting role. Thy Mitchell was a story. Born in Chicago, raised in Houston, the daughter of Vietnamese immigrants who built something from nothing as a little girl. Her weekends weren't spent at playgrounds. They were spent in her grandmother's restaurant, in her mother's kitchen, absorbing the kind of work ethic that doesn't come from a classroom. She watched her family pour everything they had into feeding people, into creating a space where strangers became guests. That never left her. She went to the University of Houston, worked her way through, then pushed further, earned a master's degree in human relations and employee relations from Penn State. This was a woman who was always building, always moving forward. She went into HR and hospitality and retail, became an operations manager, became the kind of professional that rooms paid attention to when she walked in. And then she met Matthew. Matthew Mitchell was 13 years older, Emory University educated, had studied in France, Italy, at Oxford, had worked as a journalist in London, Paris, New York, traveled the world, came back to Texas, went to Rice, entered the pharmaceutical industry, and eventually became president and CEO of the Texas Center for Drug Development, a clinical research company. That's not a small title. That's a man who ran operations, managed risk, understood systems. Then, somewhere around his mid-40s, he walked away from all of it, enrolled in culinary school, got a degree in culinary arts, and together with I, opened Traveler's Table in 2019, a restaurant inspired by the world they had explored together. Nigerian suya skewers, Japanese kaki oysters, Thai duck pad CEW, a place where you could eat your way across the globe without leaving Montrose. From the outside, they were the dream, named Houston's Restaurateurs of the Year in 2025 by the Texas Restaurant Association, featured on Guy Fieri's diners, drive-ins, and dives, running 2 restaurants, a fashion line called Foreign Fare, raising 2 kids, expecting a third. I was pregnant when she died. I want you to hold that. She was pregnant. Now I need you to start thinking like a behavioral analyst, not a news consumer. Because here's where I'm going to ask you the first question that most people aren't asking. What was actually happening beneath the surface of that perfect image? In December 2024, I sat down for an interview and talked openly about the stress of running 2 businesses, the constant risk of failure, the pressure that comes with building something from nothing. In October that same year, she and Matthew appeared on a podcast and discussed how hard it was to balance home life with the demands of the restaurant world. This was not a couple coasting. This was a couple under real, documented pressure. The restaurant industry is brutal in ways that people who haven't lived it don't fully understand. Margins are thin. Staffing is volatile. One bad quarter, one bad review cycle, one unexpected cost, and the thing you built can start to crack. They had 2 restaurants, a clothing line, a $1.2 million home in River Oaks, 2 children, a pregnancy, and an industry that they herself described as carrying constant risk of failure. Here's what I want you to sit with. When someone with Matthew's background, a pharma CEO, a man trained in risk management and organizational systems, walks away from a stable industry to open a restaurant, that's not just a passion project. That's a personality statement. It tells you something about who he was. A man who needed reinvention. A man who needed to be the center of something new. And when that something new starts to wobble, how does a man like that respond? That is a psychological question we don't have a clean answer to yet. But let me introduce something that has not gotten nearly enough attention in this coverage. The timeline. The family had not been heard from since Sunday night. The welfare check came Monday evening. Police were dispatched at approximately 5:26 p.m. When Harris County's medical examiner documented the time of death, it was recorded as 6:11 p.m. That is over 40 minutes after police were already en route. And the children, according to Fox News reporting, were found in their beds. In their beds. Now think about what that means. Those children were not in the middle of some chaotic, explosive confrontation. They were somewhere safe and familiar. Somewhere they would have been put by someone they trusted. What does that tell you about the sequence of events? What does it tell you about the emotional and psychological state of whoever was in that house? And here's the detail that makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up every single time I revisit this case. The babysitter and thy sister called independently. At the same time. Neither coordinated with the other. Both had the same feeling. Both acted on it simultaneously. In behavioral terms, that kind of parallel alarm response suggests that the people closest to this family sensed something was wrong before police confirmed anything. That's not nothing. That's a signal worth examining. Now I'm going to slow down here, because this is a part where I have to be very careful, and I think you deserve that same care. Everything I'm about to walk through next is not established fact. Houston police have named Matthew Mitchell as the suspect. The medical examiner ruled his death a suicide and the deaths of Maya, and Maxwell as homicides. That is the official position of investigators who were physically at that scene. I am not dismissing that. I am not asking you to dismiss it either. What I am asking you to do is think like a psychologist, because closed cases can still carry open questions. And the questions I'm about to raise are the kind that serious criminal behavior analysts do not simply wave away, because a scene looks complete. Start with who Matthew Mitchell was professionally before the restaurants. He ran a clinical research company in the pharmaceutical industry. Do you know what that world involves? Regulatory filings, clinical trial management, contract with pharmaceutical companies worth potentially millions of dollars. It is an industry where the line between legitimacy and exposure can be thin, where reputations are built on credibility, and where a man who walks away suddenly from a CEO position after 14 years prompts a very natural question. Why did he leave? That question has not been answered anywhere in the public record, not once in the coverage I pulled. No one has explained the circumstances of his departure from the Texas Center for Drug Development. Was it voluntary? Was there pressure? Were there disputes? No one is saying. And in a case like this, the silence around a significant chapter of someone's life is not nothing. Silence is a data point. Now layer on top of that what we know about the financial architecture of their life. A $1.2 million home, 2 restaurants, a fashion label, a 3rd child on the way, and a restaurant industry they themselves described as high pressure and risky. The public image was immaculate, but public images are constructed. They are curated. And the gap between the curated image and the private reality is exactly where behavioral analysts find the most important information. Here's a possibility that nobody in mainstream media has been willing to put on the table. What if Matthew Mitchell was carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the restaurants? What if something from his pharmaceutical past had started to resurface? Debts, disputes, obligations, relationships that don't dissolve just because you change careers. What if he was not simply a man who broke under domestic pressure, but a man who was already broken before any of this came to a head? And what if the people around him knew things that have not yet made it into any report? I want to be direct with you here. I am not saying Matthew Mitchell was innocent. I am saying that a man with his intelligence, his training in systems and operations, his experience managing high-stakes environments, represents a profile that demands more than a surface-level reading. Men with that kind of background who reach a breaking point do not always do so because of what's visible. They do so because of what they were hiding. And here's the uncomfortable truth about domestic violence and familicide that the psychology literature is very clear on. It is rarely spontaneous. It is almost always preceded by a private deterioration that the outside world never sees coming. The smiling couple in the Instagram video, the birthday caption, the matching heart-shaped glasses, the birthday post I wrote for Matthew just months before where she called him a man who could juggle kids, street market ventures, and business meetings like a pro. These are not the words of a woman who was living in obvious fear. They are the words of a woman who believed in her life, which means either the deterioration was invisible to her too, or it was invisible to everyone because it was being managed, controlled, hidden by someone who knew exactly how to present a surface, while something entirely different operated underneath. That is the psychology of a particular kind of dangerous person. Not explosive, not erratic, controlled, competent, capable of maintaining appearances under extreme internal pressure. And then, at a moment that may have been triggered by something we still don't know, that control collapsed entirely. Now, here's the part of this case that the internet has been circling without fully landing on. There are people online who believe Matthew Mitchell may not have been the one who pulled the trigger, that the scene may have been staged, that a man with enemies, with professional history, with potentially exposed secrets, could have been set up to look like the perpetrator in a crime that was actually committed by someone else entirely. Let me walk through why that theory exists and what would have to be true for it to hold. If Matthew Mitchell had adversaries from his pharmaceutical years, people who believe he had wronged them, people with financial grievances, that creates a motive for a targeted attack. A family killed execution style, in their beds, in their home, in an affluent neighborhood, with a husband's fingerprints on the gun, could theoretically be constructed to look like a murder-suicide. It has happened before in documented cases. The staged crime scene as a frame is not a fantasy. It is a category of homicide that forensic investigators specifically train to identify. What would investigators look for? The angle and trajectory of the gunshot wounds. Whether the physical evidence of the final shot, the one attributed to Matthew, is consistent with self-infliction, given his position and the weapon used. Whether there was any sign of a struggle or forced entry that was cleaned up. Whether the timeline, that 40-minute gap between dispatch and the recorded time of death, creates any space for another actor. I am not saying the police got it wrong. I am saying those are the questions that deserve to be asked out loud. Because Mitchell and her children deserve an investigation that leaves no stone unturned. And a community that just accepts the first available narrative, without pressing for the fullest possible accounting, does not actually honor them. The Restaurant Association held a vigil, and even that became a controversy, because the vigil was announced as being for the Mitchell family. All of them, together, and members of the community pushed back hard. They said you cannot memorialize a suspected killer alongside his victims in the same breath. And that reaction, that friction, tells you something important about how this case has fractured the people who love the eye. Some want answers. Some want accountability. Some want to hold the possibility open that the story isn't over. Thy sister, Lai Mai, posted about the deaths and did not name Matthew. She did not say what happened. She said only that her sister and children had passed away. She asked for privacy. She did not say murder-suicide. She did not say her brother-in-law. She said pass away. You can read that 100 different ways, but you cannot read it without noticing what was absent. What I keep coming back to is this. A woman who talked openly about the stress of building something, who grew up watching her immigrant family pour everything into their work, who by every account was a force of nature in every room she entered, who was described by people who knew her as a leader who lifted others, who was pregnant with her third child, who posted a light-hearted joke about growing old with her husband just 10 days before she died. That woman did not have a simple ending. That woman had a life with texture and depth and love and pressure and complexity. She deserved a story that carries all of that. The investigation is ongoing. No motive has been officially released. The Harris County Medical Examiner has confirmed the findings. But confirmed findings are not the same as a complete story. They are a starting point. So I want to leave you with the questions that are sitting in my chest right now. Why did Matthew Mitchell leave the pharmaceutical industry? And what happened in those final years before he walked away? What does the timeline gap between the police dispatch and the recorded time of death actually tell investigators about when this happened? Why did thy sister choose a specific language she chose in that public post? What pressure was Matthew carrying that neither his wife's birthday caption nor their Instagram feed ever revealed? And if a man with his intelligence, his background, wanted to protect his family from something he'd gotten him into, would he have been capable of making a horrific decision in what he believed, however wrongly, was some kind of desperate act of control? Or is there something or someone we haven't seen yet? I don't have all the answers. Neither do you. But I believe that Mitchell, Maya, Maxwell, and that unborn child deserve us asking every single one of them loudly and on record. Drop your theory in the comments. Tell me what you think happened in that house. Tell me what detail is pulling at you the most, because this community exists for exactly this reason, to go further than the headline, to think harder than the algorithm wants us to, and to never let the people behind these stories disappear into a footnote. If you're new here, this is Psychology of Crime. We don't just cover cases. We go inside the mind. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with us, because we are just getting started on this one.